Have you ever felt like your entire world was built on a single pillar? For me, that pillar was my job. It wasn't just what I did from 9 to 5, it was who I was, my title, my company, my salary. They were the shiny badges I wore to prove my worth, not just to others but to myself. I was successful, I was important, I was on the right track. My identity was so tightly woven into my career that I couldn't see where my job ended and where I began. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, that pillar crumbled. The meeting was brief, the language was corporate, but the message was clear. My role was redundant. I was laid off. Walking out of that office for the last time felt surreal. I remember sitting in my car, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, and I didn't recognize the person looking back. Who was I without my job title? Who was I without the morning meetings, the project deadlines, the email signature that felt like a part of my name? The silence that followed was deafening. The first few weeks were a blur of shock and denial. I'd wake up at my usual time, my body still programmed for the commute, only to be met with an empty day. The structure that had dictated my life was gone, and in its place was a terrifying void. I found myself scrolling through my social media, looking at my old posts about work achievements, and it felt like I was looking at a stranger's life. The pride I once felt was replaced by a deep, gnawing shame. This is where things got really tough. I realized how much of my self-worth was tied to external validation. The good job from my boss, the envy of my friends, the ability to buy nice things. All of it was part of a performance. And now the show was over, the audience had gone home. I was left alone on an empty stage, and I felt completely hollow. My ego, this carefully constructed character I had been playing for years, was dying. And let me tell you, watching your ego die is an excruciating process. It's a slow, painful stripping away of everything you thought you were. It fights back. It whispers insidious things in your ear. You're a failure. You have nothing. You are nothing. There were days I didn't want to get out of bed. The weight of this identity crisis was crushing. I felt lost, adrift in an ocean of uncertainty without a compass. It was tempting to jump straight back into the job hunt, to find another pillar to cling to rebuild that same old identity as quickly as possible. But a small, quiet voice inside me suggested something different. It asked, what if this is an opportunity? So reluctantly I started listening. Instead of rushing to fill the void, I just sat with it. I allowed myself to feel the discomfort, the fear, the emptiness. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. In that stillness, I began to ask myself questions I had avoided for years. What do I actually enjoy? What makes me feel alive, outside of a paycheck or a promotion? Who am I when nobody is watching? I started small. I went for long walks without my phone, just paying attention to the world around me. I picked up an old guitar that had been gathering dust in the corner. I started cooking elaborate meals, not to post on Instagram, but just for the joy of creating something. I reconnected with friends, not to talk about work, but to talk about life, fears, and dreams. Slowly, very slowly, glimmers of a new person began to emerge. This person wasn't defined by a job title. This person found joy in the process, not just the outcome. This person's worth wasn't measured by productivity or possessions, but by connection, creativity, and simple presence. I realized that my previous identity was a cage, albeit a gilded one. It had kept me safe and validated, but it had also kept me small. It had stopped me from exploring other parts of myself. Losing my job felt like the end of the world, and in a way, it was. It was the end of the world as I knew it. It was the death of an ego that was built on a foundation of sand. But from that wreckage, something far more real and resilient began to grow. It wasn't a sudden magical transformation. It was a slow, messy, and often painful rebirth. It was about learning to separate my being from my doing. I learned that I am not my successes, and I am not my failures. I am not my bank account, and I am not my job. I am the person who shows up every day, who tries their best, who feels joy, who feels pain, and who is constantly learning and evolving. Building an identity from the inside out, based on values and passions rather than external labels, is a much more stable and fulfilling way to live. I won't lie, It's an ongoing process. There are still days when the old ego tries to creep back in, whispering temptations of status and external approval. But now I can recognize its voice. I can thank it for trying to protect me, and then gently choose a different path. Losing everything I thought I was the only way I could discover who I truly am. And while I wouldn't wish that painful journey on anyone, I am profoundly grateful for where it has led me. Sometimes the most devastating endings are just the beginning of a story you didn't even know you were meant to write. If you're going through something similar, please know that you're not alone. Be patient with yourself. The emptiness you feel is not a void. It's a space waiting to be filled with a truer, more authentic version of you. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel for more reflections on life and personal growth. See you in the next one.